Well, as soon as I get in the car and I shut the door, she starts the car. They come to the car and they're starting like trying to hit me through the window. And I'm like, what the hell? So then they started opening the door. At that point, I just pulled my gun out, shot him. I was like, what the hell? She stalled the car. I get out of the car. There's one guy like crawling away. There's a bunch of people out there. It's like in the daytime. When it happened, I'm looking around. I know I'm in trouble. There's no way getting out of this.
Welcome to the Invest in Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Adrian Martinez, and today I'm joined by a former gang member by the name of Chris Curtis. Chris grew up in a broken home and started doing drugs at a very early age. This would shape his whole life of crime. He would go on to become a drug dealer and got into a lot of shootouts with a lot of different people. Chris did end up shooting a man. He went on the run for a while and was finally busted after a high-speed chase. He ended up spending 20 years behind bars. In this episode, we'll go into depth about all these topics. Please subscribe to my channel for more interviews like this. Now let's get into Chris's story. Good morning, Chris. Thank you for coming on my podcast today, man. I appreciate you taking out the time and coming on to share your story. You got a really great redemption story, man.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, well, the best way to get into your redemption story is, let's talk about your upbringing. Your little background is, you were a former addict. You went to prison for quite a bit of time, and you came out and you changed your life. And so, before you got to that point, you grew up in some tough conditions. And what were some of these conditions that you were growing up into? Because you formed an addiction very early.
Well, my childhood started out really good. As far back as I can remember, I had a good family life. I had good parents. And then, around the age of 11 or 12, now that I'm older and I look back, I was able to, identify certain things that were happening and, was declining. And then, my parents lost their house. That was the beginning of it. At the time, I didn't know why. I was young. So, we just lost the house and moved into another house. And then, then my mom left my dad. And what happened then was me and my brother went to go live with my dad. And it was a rundown house. There was a roommate there living there, Italian guy. And, people were coming and going all the time. And, I soon realized what was going on. My dad was selling drugs out of the house, and not too long after that, my dad started me and my best friend on cocaine. And from there, my life just deteriorated. Me being a young, kid, I thought all this was great. My dad's giving me drugs, we're getting drugs all the time, doing cocaine, getting lines for, doing the dishes or Christmas, or getting cocaine for Christmas presents or cartons of cigarettes. It was a dysfunctional atmosphere, and for a kid, when you're that young, you don't understand what the effects are going to be on your life because of this. So, quickly I ended up in juvenile hall, not long after that for, destroying a cafeteria at school. And my life just spiraled out of control. I was in and out of juvenile hall a few times. And then, I was living in the city of Orange at the time. And then after my dad got arrested, the cops raided the house. I ended up moving to Anaheim, which is in Orange County. And, that's when I started using meth. And from there on, you just start, you're on the streets, you start running around with gangs, and you just become, pretty much essentially a bad person.
What age were you when you were starting to do meth?
That was around 18 years old.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so after you got out of like juvie and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I went through all that. And then, first, when you're on the streets and you start using meth and you're starting doing crime and you're young, the crimes start out little, like stealing cans for drugs, taking them and getting the money for that. And then, quickly you start hanging around other people. You start hanging around people. Essentially what happens to kids is when they can't find love at home, they're going to find it somewhere. And the bad thing about it is they usually find it on the streets. That's why you see all these kids running around with gangs because, they don't have no love at home. So they're finding it from these people who they think they're their friends or they think they really care, but essentially they're wrecking their life,
Right. And
And
I was gonna
so,
add into this as well, is like a lot of stuff was going on at your house, and for the people watching, I read Chris's book. It was great. It was really good. I highly recommend it. But in his book, he talks about his early life and just the stuff that was going on at his house. It was like guys coming in and out doing drugs, having parties, and all kinds of stuff. So this easily for him looked like it was a great thing to do. He was having a fun time with his dad doing, giving him drugs and stuff. So it formed this habit, and eventually it just really started to spin out of into like meth and stuff. And when you got into meth, that's when all these other things like this happened all over a span of years. I mean, what were you, like 10 or 11 when you were doing this stuff with your dad, and then where you're at now is like
I
you're
started,
18.
well, I started out when I was like 13. My dad started me cocaine when I was 13, but I'll say this. So during that time living in that house, I adopted a bunch of, character defects, you know, after doing several self-help groups and understanding addiction and understanding a little psychology, you adopt all these character defects, drug addiction, low self-esteem, criminality. I adopted all that stuff as a kid, living in that house. Criminality became normalized, using drugs was normalized, um, just being antisocial was normalized, and I adopted all these character defects, or you could even say these are causative factors of what, you know, ultimately ended me up in prison.
Hmm.
But what happens is you adopt all these things and you don't know how to deal with them as a kid. So what happens is you bring all this stuff into your adulthood, and it just gets worse because you don't deal with it. You don't know how to deal with it, and then you start saying stuff like, well, I'll never be anything but a drug addict because my dad started me on drugs. And essentially you blame all your problems on everybody but yourself,
Well,
And
what was your mom's thoughts on this?
well, we moved back and forth. My mom really didn't know what was going on until, later, after my dad got in trouble, So but of course she was traumatized over it, Uh but there's it's just one of them things that happens, my and I used to have like a lot of resentments towards my dad for years, until I realized, that obviously he had issues too, he was a drug addict and he was sick, and it doesn't really give an excuse for what he did. But now that I'm older and I understand drug addiction, I understand, some of the stuff that I did because of my drug addiction which was a lot worse than my dad ever did. I went to the extreme. I was able to forgive him essentially. I still get mad or, whatever, but you know, I blamed everything on everybody else but myself for years,
Well,
Um,
I was gonna say let's go back to where you were. You were talking about it as well, like that when you were 18 years old, you started getting money, and at first it started off as selling cans, collecting cans, and selling them, but like it led into something deeper. So we'll get into like
yeah,
how you ended up getting to prison, because this is where it all started, man. Just doing
yeah.
small things at the beginning. So
Okay,
what
so yeah. So what are you gonna say?
I was gonna say, so what was going on? Like, what were you doing, like, to get money when you were 18?
Well, like we weren't collecting cans, we were stealing them. So we would like in the daytime we'd go around and look at, a side of houses and you could pretty much see bags of cans on the side of houses. We'd write down the address and come back at night and take them. Sometimes we made like $200 a night, but
Off cans, damn.
that quickly, yeah, dude, that quickly, yeah, we have a truck full, we got shot at, all sorts of shit,
For
but
cans.
yeah, dude, it
Wow.
was crazy, bro. But and then all that stuff, it escalates. You start doing more, everything becomes easier and easier. And then I was just doing low level crimes and everything like that. But then I met some people and I started running around with gangs, and then that's when everything got really serious. At first, I was getting bullied on the streets a little bit, and because I really wasn't a tough kid at the time. I mean, not like these people were, because essentially the city of Orange and Anaheim are like two different places. Anaheim in Orange County is kind of like LA. It's gang infested, and if you're running around a crowd of people that are using drugs, it's usually in the gangs, and then next thing you know, I'm getting shot at. We're selling a lot of drugs for this girl, and it just got worse, man. Next thing you know, I'm carrying a gun and I'm shooting at people.
Can you
And I never
mention
thought I'd do
the
that.
are you able to
What's
mention
that?
the gang you were with?
I was from Crazy White Boys.
Crazy White Boys. So how did
Yeah.
that like how did they approach you, or did you approach them, or
Well,
how did it go
I
down?
just ran with I just ran with them on the streets. I just ended up meeting them on the streets, and then you just end up hooking up with them, you know. And and what eventually happened was, after like 3 or 4 years, this was between 90 and 95, all this stuff was going on. It just escalated. It came to the point where, I was essentially shooting at people for no reason. Not no reason in my eyes, but when I look back now, it was stupid. Like, I would not hesitate, to shoot at somebody or, whatever.
What was the
And
reason?
well, like, I'll give you an example. There's one story that so what happened was, we were selling drugs out of this house. This was right by Disneyland in Anaheim. And some guy came up to the house, and he wanted to buy some drugs, but he wouldn't come in the house outside. So I'll go out there. So I had an ounce of dope, and I go out to the car, and the dude's like, "Give me the drugs." I'm like, "No, man. Here." I showed him my gun. I told him, "Look, if I wanted your money, I'd just take it from you." So he throws, he throws a wad of money on this front seat. He's driving on the passenger seat. So it looks like it's the amount of money. It's a big wad of cash. I pick it up and throw the dope on the seat, but he just takes off, like screeches. And in my mind, I'm like, what's going on? So I just start shooting at him. You know what I mean? And I go in the house, and my buddy's just like, "Dude, what are you doing, dude? What happened? What happened?" I'm like, you know, I don't know. The dude just took off. Count the money. So he counts the money, and it's $5 short. But
Five
in
bucks.
my mind, you know what I mean? In my mind, I thought this dude was burning me or whatever. And then that escalated into some other things, and that same group of people, some other stuff happened, and then there was this guy that got killed on a motorcycle in a high-speed chase with the Anaheim Police Department. And me and my buddy, we were on the telephone. He was in prison, and I was talking to him at this guy's house, on a regular telephone. And we were talking about it. And I said, "Hey, this guy got killed on the motorcycle," and we both laughed about it. But there was this girl there that was listening, and it was friends of all these other guys. It was their friend that got killed in the motorcycle accident. And so she went and told them. And now all these guys are calling all my friends saying that, "Hey, we're going to get Chris." And I was just kind of laughing because I'm like, yeah, whatever. And so this went on for a couple months. They're going to get me or whatever. Well, I ran into him. I was at an apartment complex, and I go in the apartment up there, and these guys come inside, and I realize who they are. You know what I mean? These are these guys, his friends. They say they're gonna get me. So they leave, and I tell the girl I'm with, "Hey, we're leaving." And she's like, "Well, these guys are gonna fucking beat you up." I'm like, "Yeah, what? We're leaving right now before they get more friends or guns. I don't know. I already have a gun on me. I always carry a gun." So I'm like, "We're out of here." And so we get to the bottom of the stairs. They're all standing there. I just told the girl, I'm like, "Go get in the car because they're not going to mess with you." So she gets in the car, and I stop in front of them, and I'm like, "What's up?" Like, they didn't say nothing. They were just like, whatever. So I just walked off and got in the car. Well, as soon as I get in the car and I shut the door, she starts the car, they come to the car and they're starting like trying to hit me through the window. And I'm like, what the hell? So then they started opening the door. At that point, I just pulled my gun out, shot them, Uh, and I was like, what the hell? She stalled the car. I get out of the car. There's one guy like crawling away. There's a bunch of people out there. It's like in the daytime. When it happened, I'm looking around. I know I'm in trouble. There's no way getting out of this. There's one guy crawling away, and I'm just like, I kind of like turned him over and said, "You're fucking stupid, dude. I carry a gun." Like, I was kind of mad. Like, what are you doing? And we take off, and then the cops call me. They want me to come turn myself in, which obviously that's not going to happen. So I went on the run, and I was on the run for about a couple months until they caught up with me on my motorcycle. And then we got in a high-speed chase, and you know how that goes. On a motorcycle in Anaheim during traffic, it doesn't last that long. I ended up crashing, and they got me. I went to jail. I went to prison. That was my first term. But that's just like one story of many of them that happened. But I never in my life thought I'd be like that. And I just had no compassion. On the streets is survival. You're either going to be tough or you're not going to have nothing. And I just didn't want to live like that. So I just took it to the extreme.
Did that guy end up dying?
No, they lived. I shot two guys got shot. And they both lived.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I did. What's that?
oh, I was gonna say, yeah. So I mean, you ended up going. How long did you go away for that?
I did 6 years for that.
Damn.
So it was aggravated assault with a firearm. So there were a bunch of witnesses that said they started it, and all that. And it was right before California came in with that law where if you use a gun, you go to jail for life. I just missed that. So I got 6 years, 85% with 2 strikes.
Jeez.
And there, the 2 strikes is like, if you get trouble for anything else again, you're getting life.
Well,
So,
I mean, this was part of your whole. I mean, your first term. Like, this is when you were running with the gang, and then, of course, I know in the book you talked about eating meth, which would make you like this super super high. Like, it never ended well. And was this one of the instances I think maybe you talked about in the book?
well, that's not one of those instances. That was, but there were several things that happened doing that. My buddy would always give it to me too. He'd be like, "Hey, we got to go do this. We're going over here. Here, eat this." And it never went well.
What is the
But
difference like about eating meth? Like, why
I
does it
don't
mess you
know.
up so bad?
Like some people shoot it up. Some people smoke it. But I didn't shoot up meth at this time. At this time I was just like smoking it, snorting it, and eating it. But I don't know what it is. But back in the '90s, the meth was real. Like now, the meth is just a bunch of crap. It just makes you crazy. But I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But it just does something to you, like and I would do some crazy shit, man. And but when the shooting happened, I wasn't really too high. I was kind of like just woke up almost, and I didn't have to be high to do the shit that I was doing. But when I was, it didn't end well usually, But yeah, that shit went on for like 4 or 5 years before I ended up going to prison, And
Yeah. You want to talk about the prison part of it now, like your first term in prison?
Well, the first term in prison, I went to a Sentinella, which is a level 3 yard. I only lasted on a level 3 yard for about 6 months, and then I went to the level 4 prison, and you hear all these stories about prison, like this and that, whatever. But I don't like to glamorize prison because to me, I think it's worthless. It's hypocritical. The politics in prison, like you have these guys on these shows talking about prison and this and that, and it's all bullshit, man. My first term, I was on a level 4 yard. I did like 5 years at Old Corcoran. And then, I seen a lot of crazy shit, I was young. I went through a lot of crap. There was a lot of riots. There was a lot of shit going on there. And then, I kind of just went, you just go through the days, 6 years. When you get 6 years, you think, oh God, it's going to be forever. But essentially, it kind of went by pretty fast. Next thing you know, you're out. Um, I paroled when I was like 30 years old, you know, thinking that I was never coming back because I knew that if I ever did anything at all, I would never be getting out of prison. You know, at that time in the state of California in 2002, if you got a life sentence, that's like life without because they were never letting lifers out at all.
Wow.
So I didn't want to get in trouble at all, you
Were you
know.
staying clean in there?
Yeah. Yeah, at the end. In the beginning, not so much, but in
Yeah.
the end was. But then I paroled in 2002 and I was doing good. And then next thing you know, I started using again. But I was selling drugs before I started using because my girlfriend brought some drugs home and I didn't want to use it because I knew the consequences of it. So I would just sell it, and next thing you know, I'm selling a lot of it. And then, with drugs, eventually if you're an addict and you're around it and you really don't have skills or willpower, you're going to end up using it. And I did. And 8 months later, I was back in jail, in the county jail. You know,
How was
for
it like for your first when you first did it again? Like, I mean, because you were trying to fight the urges for a while, and like when you gave in, how did you feel?
well, you feel great for a while. It's an exhilarating feeling. You think you could do anything. You know, but I grew up on Ritalin as a kid too, so I didn't mention that. But Ritalin is pharmaceutical meth, is what it is. So it affects people in different ways. It just depends on the chemistry of your brain. So I'm able to, as long as I didn't do a lot of it, I was able to make a lot of money on it. I was able to, it made me concentrate better because I have ADHD really bad. So it helped me concentrate. But if I did a lot of it, then I was gone. But I, uh, I quickly just went downhill, after I started using again. You know, I didn't call my mom. I just pretty much just ended up back on the streets. I was making a lot of money, of course, and I was running from state to state selling drugs and doing all that. But once I got busted, it was over. And I knew it. I knew that it was over. And in October of 2002, I got surrounded by cops once again, got in a high-speed chase and got busted with a lot of drugs, another gun, and went back to the county jail. And I knew then that, it was over.
What was it
And
like?
they offered,
I was gonna say, like,
what's
what
that?
happened? Like, what? How did you even get busted? Like, what had occurred? Like, were the feds watching you for a while?
Well, so had a PAL warrant because I stopped going to the parole office. So what they do, they put a PAL warrant out for you, parolee at large. And so they were after me, and then one of my friends got in trouble in one of my rent-a-cars because I had a couple rent-a-cars. I was doing a whole bunch of stuff. And there was a Tech 9 back there and a bunch of other stuff, and they're like calling me saying, hey, do you want to come get your stuff? Which of course I'm not going to do it. So now I got, the South County Sheriff's looking for me and the parole department and whatever law enforcement coming after me. So I would only stay in California for like 24 hours and then I'd take off to Arizona. And then from Arizona, I'd go to Idaho because I knew if I stayed too long, that they would end up finding me. And one day I stayed, one time I came back and I stayed too long and they found me and they surrounded me in a rental car. And, I had a gun on my lap and, I don't know, a couple pounds of meth. And, I ran, because I knew that I had to get away. But, of course, they already had the helicopter there. So they know that I run. So they had the helicopter there and had a high speed chase. And, you know, they got me. I was
Okay.
jumping fences, and pouring meth in pools and whatever, trying to get rid of it. But, yeah, they got me again.
So
But this time, luckily, I didn't hurt nobody in the high-speed chase, because my last high-speed chase actually hit a crossing guard, on
damn.
my motorcycle. I clipped the crossing guard. So it wasn't the only reason why I'm out today is because my third strike was not a violent felony. It was a non-violent felony, you know.
But if you would
And
have hit someone, then yeah, it would have been a whole
well, yeah,
different.
if I would have hit somebody or whatever, it would have been a violent felony, In 2000, I want to say 15, they changed the laws, which stated that, Prop 57, if a third striker had a non-violent felony, he can go to board as long as he has 15 or more years in, he can go to board to get out. And at the time I had 20 years in. So I went to board, and here I am, I got, by the grace of God, I'm getting a second chance at life. And, I'm not going to take that for granted for 1 second,
When you went into court, like, and did you have to do a whole trial, or what was like the whole court process like when you got in trouble for this last time?
So when I went into court the first time, the judge literally laughed when he read my charges. He just laughed,
He knew you.
and they were off. Yeah, well, he didn't know me, but he just read the case. And then with my past, he just he just laughed and said, yeah, this is a 3-strike case. I'm bounding him over to Superior Court. I knew when I got in trouble that it was over, Um, so they were offering me 107 years to life. And
Sheesh.
so that went on for a while, but I pled guilty to the mercy of the court, trying to get the Romero Act. And what the Romero Act does is it strikes a strike and you get like 10 years, and, you don't get a life sentence. But, that didn't happen. And they ended up giving me 28 to life.
And when they gave you that, like, was there any deals or anything, or that was what you were convicted of?
That was it. I got 28 to life. And at that time, 28 to life was like life without. You were never getting out of prison. I was devastated, bro. I don't know, for somebody that actually has gotten a life sentence that's listening right now, it's a crazy feeling, man, when you just, think you're going to die in prison.
How could
You
you
know,
explain it?
you really can't, dude, but you just kind of you adapt to the situation. People say, oh, I can't make it in jail. I can't make it in prison or whatever. But, once it happens, you have no choice. You either adapt to it, figure out how to deal with it, or, you just have to deal with it. You have to, and you just go through the days. You wake up, you drink coffee, you go to breakfast, you work out. It's the same freaking thing, wait for your packages or whatever. And that's what you do, man. And it's just a crazy feeling, bro, when you think when you just don't have any contact really with society, and you think it's over. You think you're never getting out. It's a feeling like I really can't even explain it, but it definitely changes you. You know, if you do a lot of time in prison, and the people that have done a lot of time, like, have had a life sentence. I'm not talking like people who do like 10, 15 years and get out. I'm talking like people who had life sentences and now, literally have lost their lives and now are out of prison. It changes you, man. And if it doesn't change you, I don't know what to say, man. But I have several friends that are out now after doing life sentences, and all of them are doing good. Uh, and I think that the state of California has finally realized that, that, these people that have to go to board to get out, they actually learn about themselves. They're able to, understand drug addiction, and they stay out of prison. I'm not saying everyone does, but a big percentage of people do.
So, in what ways did it change you?
Well, they make you go to these, they make you, in order to get out through the board of prison terms, you have to take classes, you have to understand, you have to have an insight paper. You have to understand, who you were then, who you are now, what changed you, you know, uh, why you did what you did. So I'll give you an example, so my insight paper, it starts out from when I was a kid, about my life, and then how my dad started me on drugs, and then like causative factors through that. what changed me, like, being started on drugs is a causative factor, criminality. It's just like the character defect thing. You have to learn about yourself and why you became who you were and who you are and how you changed. So back then, I was a drug addict. I was a criminal. I was a gang member. I had no compassion. I was antisocial. Now, I understand. I take responsibility for that. I understand that I harmed people. I understand that, that my actions of me selling drugs to somebody is creating victims. When I sold drugs to people, I don't know what they did with those drugs. I don't know if they were using drugs and, you know, uh, creating victims to whatever, who knows, but you understand that stuff. You understand that the victim's impact, like when I shot them guys, I didn't only hurt them, I hurt the families, hurt the community, the first responders. Everybody has to deal with that stuff. For me shooting those people, there's a whole circle of people that were affected by my actions. And once you understand that, you're able to step back and say, and analyze the situation and think, hey, that's messed up. I created a lot of victims throughout my life. And now, I just going through my life trying to make up for my past. Like I've gone to a few schools and talked to kids and stuff like that, or I go to like sober living homes and talk to people. I just do what I can to help now. I work a lot and stuff like that, but whenever I get some free time or somebody asks me to, I'll go speak to them or talk to them or try to help them out.
So at that point where you like were just starting to realize that, hey man, all the stuff I was doing was wrong.
Yeah. So in like 2015, I got in trouble in prison. I was selling drugs in prison again, like selling drugs and, doing stupid stuff. And I ended up in Ad Seg. And it was my daughter's birthday when I woke up. And I'm like, I just don't want to do this anymore. If I'm going to die in prison, I want to die a good person. I want to die, a good person. I just don't want to do this no more. And I made a commitment, to God and myself that, the next place I go, that I'm going to immerse myself in these groups, because they started all these groups in California, self-help groups, CGA, Victims Impact, Houses of Healing. They started all this stuff to help people get out through the board. So I took a bunch of groups, and that's when I started really, understanding myself and understanding addiction. You don't get a lot out of one group, but you take something out of each group that's going to help you, move forward. And the biggest thing for me was realizing that, uh, that I can't, once you take responsibility for your life, and you stop blaming all your problems on everybody else, you can move forward and you could do anything you want at that point. I got an AA degree, electrical vocation. I did all this stuff I said I could never do, and, now I live a successful life. I'm an electrician, and, I love my life right now. And I never, ever, ever thought that it could be possible. You know, uh, it's amazing, like I got off parole 2 weeks ago. I'm totally free person now. There's nothing hanging over my head. I
Just
don't have
recently.
anything. Yeah, just a couple weeks ago, I got off parole. I'm totally free now.
Damn,
Last
man.
last night, I asked my girlfriend to marry me. We're gonna get married.
Congratulations, man.
Yeah, thank you, dude. I'm gonna be a husband.
A lot
I'm
of
gonna
good
be,
stuff.
dude. I'm a pro-social person now. I'm a member of society, 100%.
How's it feel?
I got a bunch of. It's great. I got a bunch of tattoos. So when I walk around, sometimes I just, I was on parole. I'm thinking, oh yeah, I'm on parole or just whatever. And it's crazy because when I walk the dog around the block now, I just think, dude, I'm like totally free now.
That's
This is
insane.
crazy. 7 years ago, or what, I never ever thought I was even going to get out of prison. Like it was just not going to happen. And
When
here I
did
am. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, when did you get like this information that you were gonna be able to get out of prison, like at all?
It was like 2017. So I changed my life before this. Even though I thought I was never getting out, I changed. I mean, of course, I'm not perfect, but I really did change. Like, and then they started talking about us getting out. And I was like, yeah, thinking, this ain't never gonna happen. I'm a three striker. And then next thing you know, there's, in 2020, they say, hey, you're going to board. So I did everything that I could do to make sure that I got through the board of prison terms, because that is the hardest thing I ever had to do in my whole life, was get through the board of prison terms. I don't know, in California or any state for that matter, going in front of an ex-judge, an ex-cop, and all these people and trying to tell them how you change is not an easy thing to do. They sit there and listen to people all day long. And, mostly every time the person's going to get denied on their first time, rarely ever does anybody get granted parole on their first parole hearing, you know? And I did all this stuff. Like I just made it was like my little board packet was like a work of art. Like I'd had guys tell me like, hey, you don't need to do all that. They're just going to let us out. We're nonviolent three strikers. And I'm like, dude, we're career criminals, bro. I don't know about you, but I shot people, and I know you've done some crazy stuff too. They're not just going to let us out. And those dudes would go to board and they deny them. And these are my really good friends, and I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to do everything I freaking possibly can to make sure that they let me out on my first time. Even though I really never thought it was going to happen, there's no way they're just going to let me out on my first time. No way, especially after what happened in 2015. But they did, dude. They granted me parole on my first time. And, I was out 4 months later. I've been out 2 years. And it's an amazing feeling, man. It's crazy, man.
When you walked out them doors, how did you feel that first time?
Dude, I was just like, it's like unbelievable, and it was, it's unbelievable. Yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, with it now, you really think about it, 2 years isn't that long ago compared to how long you were in there. So readjusting and everything, like, how was that process when you came out?
It took me a while to, like, I don't sleep well. I slept better in prison than I do out here.
Really? How?
Yeah, like I'll give you an example. This morning I got up at like 1:30, I went to bed at like 9, and I'll be to bed at like 9 at night, sometimes I sleep good, but I for a long time I really wasn't sleeping at all, and I think what happens is that, you're in prison, you wake up in a cell, you drink coffee, you watch the news a little bit, you go to chow, you work out, you come back, you watch TV, you go to sleep. It's just the same old thing. There's nothing to do. But then when you get out of prison, now when you wake up, you could go outside, you get on your phone, you could do whatever you want. And your mind is just like, there's so much stuff to do. That's just what I'm thinking here, like, that's just my thinking. Like now it's just like, it's crazy. It's crazy. I'm starting to sleep better now. But yeah, I didn't really sleep at all when I first got out,
It was
but
a little hard
I go to work I go to work every day. I go to the gym 5 days a week. And I'm working today, I'm a little tired, but you know what? The way I look at it is, man, it's if you want to be successful, bro, like for me, I got a lot of stuff I want to do, man. I don't want to my biggest fear is retirement. I haven't paid nothing into retirement. I don't want to retire and live on Social Security. So I'm trying to figure out a way, to make my life better. So when that time comes, I can travel. I can enjoy my life, because I essentially wasted 26 years of my life in prison.
That's how
over half my life. Yeah, I was in prison for 6 years and then got out for 8 months and did 20 years straight.
Jeez, man. Yeah, it's a lot of time to make up for.
Yeah, dude. And I don't have I really don't have I have my health. I went to the doctor yesterday, and I'm healthy because I was in prison working out for 26 years. I got great blood pressure, I'm 52 years old, you know, uh but I lift weights every day at work. I mean, my knees are all messed up from working out in prison, from having to do those burpees all the time. But other than
But
that, dude, you know, I just go to church on the weekends. It's just an amazing life, man. Like I try to tell people that, who are struggling through drug addiction, like, you have to take responsibility for your life, bro. You can't blame all your problems on everybody. You either, if you don't, if you want to live a good life, you have to stop using. If using meth is a problem, you shouldn't do it. If drinking is a problem for you, you shouldn't do it. Opiates is obviously a problem either way you look at it. You shouldn't do it.
right.
Anything that's toxic in your life, you shouldn't do it, man. If you're around some people and they're toxic or they're causing problems, you shouldn't be around them. If I could change after what I've been through and who I was, anybody could change, bro. I just bought a brand new truck a year ago. I've been out of prison for what, 2 years? I bought a brand new $66,000 truck. Not from the book sales, because I haven't sold many books. This is from working hard. You know what I
Right.
mean? A 2022 Silverado Chevy truck. I drive it
Yeah.
around. I got an R6 motorcycle too. A Yamaha R6 racing motorcycle.
Well,
And now I've been out 2 years, but
what
I had
would you
all that
tell
in
you?
like a year.
Yeah, no,
What's
I'm
that?
sure. What would you tell your younger self, man, if you could go back to the day before you went to prison, man?
You know, um, I would tell that person, you're gonna ruin your life, man. All this stuff all these false, stuff you're following, these gangs, all these people that you think you're friends, they're really not, man. You know, uh, I could have, I have a good life now. Don't get me wrong. I'm very grateful for the people I have in my life. I'm very grateful. If I didn't go through what I went through in my life, I wouldn't be who I am today, which is, a good person. But I think that, people, they have to make good decisions, man. And when you're a kid, it's hard to tell anybody or anyone what to do when they're young because they just don't listen, man. I had people telling me when I was a kid, I don't know what I would say to my younger self, but maybe that, it's not your fault. It's not your fault that you didn't understand anything. It's not your fault that, it's not my fault that what happened to me is not my fault. What my fault was is blaming all my problems on everybody but myself and not taking responsibility for my life. That's what I would say to my younger self
Yeah, that's a
is
good
that
way to put it.
take responsibility for your life. There's just no other way to say it. You
Yeah.
know, um,
You're right, though. I
it's
mean,
a
it is hard to try to talk to your younger self and say that because he ain't gonna want to listen. I mean, you had to go through all what you
yeah.
went through.
It doesn't matter what you say. You know, but when I go to schools now and I talk to kids, like I've been to a few schools. Whenever I can hook it up, I go to schools and talk to
Right.
kids, like at-risk youth or whatever. And the amazing thing is that they listen, because at that age I wasn't listening to nobody.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
they listen to people. They listen to people like me, man. Like like I'll give you an example. I'll just kind of say this. All these people that are looking down on drug addicts that have never been through it, like these people that have good families and they're like, oh, he's a drug addict, he's this or he's that or whatever. But you know who the person is that saves these people when their family member gets on drugs or their kid gets on drugs? People like me, ex-gang members, ex-drug addicts that have been through it are usually the ones that help those people, because a psychologist can't come in, or a drug counselor that's never been through it, and say, hey, you shouldn't use drugs. This is why. They're not going to listen to them.
Can't connect.
They are not. They are not going to listen to them, dude. You know who these people listen to? These kids, these drug addicts. They listen to people like me.
No, you're right.
People who've been to prison, people who've been through it. That's the only people they listen to.
That's the only way you can really fully understand it and really grasp someone's attention, though. Like, if not, I mean,
Yeah,
it's just like you're reading like a book of history, someone trying to tell you this other shit. But, it's like if
yeah,
you tell them it's like a personal experience, man, and you can detour them as
dude.
much as you can try.
And it's hard, dude. Like, I go to work early in the morning. I get up at 2:30. I leave for work at 3. But where I live, in the area I live at, there's like 30 or 40 homeless guys that just run around this area. They're all nodding out on the street corner. Or like when I go to the gas station early in the morning, hey, can I get $1? Whatever. And the crazy thing is that it's just crazy when I look at that now. Like, I was never homeless because I would just never live on the streets. I mean, I was on the streets, of course, but I always made sure I had money. No matter what I had money. I sold drugs, but I never lived like that. But I see these guys now that just live on the streets or sleeping on the corner or whatever, and it's crazy, man. But when they come up and ask me for money or whatever, I give it to them. But I also tell them, like, hey, I can get you into sober living home. I can get you into detox. They want nothing to do with it. Like, addiction is a hard, especially the fentanyl now. It's all different now. So when I was
It's
growing
terrible.
up, it was meth. It was meth. Now it's fentanyl. And they have meth, but it's not really meth. I don't know what it is, but it's got fentanyl in it. But
Yeah.
this new fentanyl, it's crazy, man. These people are they're dying like every 2 minutes. Something dies from every 2 minutes. Somebody in the United is dying from fentanyl.
It's
Every
a
2 minutes,
it's
or
like
like
this
in
super
5 minutes.
drug, man.
Yeah, yeah. Like, well, every 5 minutes, 2 people are dying from fentanyl.
That's
That's
nuts.
crazy.
Yeah,
You
but
know,
you could believe it. I mean, you see the stuff on the news, Facebook and everything about this. But and I even interviewed
uh,
someone that recently was on that stuff like that, and they got off and changed their life around. But they said it's like nothing you can ever have. I mean, like it's new. It's like a whole new thing, man. But like it was like this thing that got them super high, and then it just changed their life so much, and they just went straight
dude,
downhill, man. Not a lot of people die from it. I mean,
yeah,
he was
dude, they don't
lucky.
make it through it.
No, I know.
Yeah, they don't make it through, man. It's terrible. And you know, the crazy thing too, I heard that Gavin, what state are you in?
Nebraska.
Nebraska. So in California, Gavin Newsom
Hmm.
is passing this law. It's going to be voted on here pretty soon, I think in November. That they could, if the law passes, they're going to be able to just go on the streets and just pick these people up off the streets and commit them and put
Really?
them in these programs. Yeah,
Damn.
it's going to happen. It's kind of like back in the day before Ronald Reagan stopped it or whatever. They used to have these psych wards for people where they kept them, and they were, these people. There's a lot of mental health problems in the country, and Ronald Reagan. I think it was Ronald Reagan who stopped all that, to where they had these places for these people. So now all these people are just running around the streets, or they put them in prison, and they're not getting the medical care they need. And some people they just can't fend for themselves. They're mentally incompetent,
What do you
and they're on the streets. I see them walking around, flipping their hands, or naked, or whatever. And for a country, from the most powerful country in the world, it's crazy to think about that we can't take care of them, but we're like, sending all this money to all these other countries, but we can't take care of, the people, our veterans, or whatever. It's
yeah.
freaking crazy, man.
What are your thoughts on them doing that then with this new program or this new law? Do you think it's a good
I
idea?
think that I do. I do think it's a good idea. I think that that law, it's not going to help a lot of people, but it's not going to help a lot of the people that are already, in that position. I mean, sure, some people are going to get help, they're going to get better. But what it's going to do is it's going to take all these people off the streets. And these kids are not going to have to see this stuff growing up thinking it's normal. I think that, society, I think that our kids are being led in the wrong direction in too many ways, you know, And, our environments, they say we're all products of our environments, you know? So, if these kids, you know, we're not we're not doing any justice to our kids in America. We're subjecting them to all this stuff that is really it's not going to work. Our country is, it's just not going to work. I'm not saying that, it's like that for all the kids, you know what I mean? But 95% of people in prison come from a one-parent family.
Really? Holy crap!
You know,
Damn,
yeah.
that's a high percentage.
Well, I mean, it's something like that. I don't know if it's exact percentage, but it's a lot, dude. They
Well,
come from a
yeah,
one-parent family.
like a
You know what I
broken
mean?
home
And
and that kind of
just
thing.
a
Yeah.
one-parent family, dude. So nowadays in California, if you got one parent, you got to support two kids or one kid for that. How do you do that? You
Right.
have to work two jobs. You don't have time to sit at home with your kids. Your kids are out there running around with whoever.
Yeah.
You don't have money to put them into sports. You don't have none of that. That's one of the things I want to do is I want to, start donating money to, lower risk, like, high risk, areas where kids can't afford to be into sports or whatever.
That'd be a good way
That's,
to.
well, what a percentage of my book is going to at-risk youth. So I'm going to give it to like organizations to pay for kids to get in sports, like single parent families or whatever.
Yeah.
I think the kids are just way too bored,
Well, yeah. If you have nothing else to do, yeah, what else are they going to do? But you, with your book too, I wanted to say is like, if there's anyone that wants to help Chris get to help him promote his book, that's what he's looking for. He needs, he's got the social medias and stuff, but he's just, a busy guy. He just would like to. If anybody got any ideas or anything, I'll put his email in the video description, and I'll also put his book in the video description as well, so you can check it out. It's a good book and just a good redemption story. It's just, he goes into more detail about his life story.
Yeah. Also, I'd like to say too, if anybody wants me to sign a copy and send it to them, they could email me, and we could, I'll give me their address, and I'll sign a copy for $20 and send it to them. Or if they ever need to talk, man, they can get on my social media, OC the Dark Side 8083. That's on TikTok and Instagram. If they have any questions and want to talk to me about anything or have any problems or anything that they think I could help them with, don't hesitate, to contact me.
Yeah. I mean,
I have some
that's
good
cool.
advice, man.
I didn't even know you had plenty of experience.
I've been through a lot, and I'm not the only one. There's a bunch of people out there just like me who've been through it, have gotten their life together. And even if you've never been through drug addiction or anything for that matter, our stories impact thousands and thousands of lives, man. Telling my story is going to help the next person understand their story. It could spark a light in their brain and tell them, hey, look, man, I could change, and that's the hope here, is that, to start saving people, start talking to kids, start helping anybody for that fact, it's a crazy world out there right now. After getting out after 20 years and seeing what's going on, it's kind of crazy, man. The government's just taking all our money now. It's kind of crazy, dude.
Yeah, well, Chris, I do appreciate you coming on today and sharing your story, man. You got one damn good redemption story, and I'm glad that you're trying your best to, help out at-risk criminals and stuff, and or former or at-risk addicts and stuff like that, man. Because
Yeah.
you're right. I mean, your story can really impact people, and if anybody can help him out or has any ideas or anything, like I said, I'll put his email in the video description so you can reach out to him and just, maybe you guys can line something up or something. I don't know. I mean, just anything, because like you said, his book sales go to helping out, at-risk criminals or whatever the case may be. I mean, it just goes to show that you're still trying to actively help and do stuff like that. But that's great though. You've been out 2 years. You've done a lot of work now. It sounds like just constantly working, and course, wrote your book as well, and just staying busy and staying out of the trouble, man. That's great. That's stay away from that crap, man.
Yeah, I'm good with
But
that.
yeah, well,
I'm good with that.
well, you got any final words before we wrap up on here?
No, that's pretty much it. I just like to, say thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Well, thank you.
Chris has got a powerful redemption story. He was able to overcome a lot of adversity that he went through in life. If he could change his life around, anyone can. I mean, he spent 20 plus years behind bars in prison. It took a lot to change him, but like he said in this interview, this is what he needed. He needed something that was going to change his life drastically, or else he was going to continue to live like that. Since he's been out of prison, he's been working hard, and he wrote a book as well. I'll put that in the video description. I highly recommend that. He goes into way more depth about his life story on there. Please comment any key takeaways that you got from this interview with Chris. Please share it with anyone that you think will enjoy this type of interview. Also, don't forget to hit subscribe to my channel to get more videos like this. And if you want to be the first to get notified when I drop a new video, please be sure to hit the notification button. At the end of this video, a playlist will pop up of all the other Invest in Yourself podcasts I've done in the past. Thank you again so much for watching, and of course, we'll see everyone on the next one.